Okay, guys, so we're back. It is Fun Day Sunday still, but I decided to switch the flow a little bit and start recording the videos a little later in the evening because I was sacrificing sleep at night trying to do this and go to church. And I felt like at church I was just not at my best, what I mean, in my worship and these type of things, and just like, in my fellowship with the other brethren and whatnot. And so I tried something new, try to go a little bit different, but without further ado, I'm trying to get into a topic today that's a little off of the script of what we normally do. Now, I did not put this together, y'all. I did not think about elections. I believe, it's past 12, so I believe it is election day as right now, as I'm recording this video. And, y'all could see I'm out in, I don't know, Bora Bora or something. I'm just kidding. This is just a background that I got going on there essentially. But I'm back in Canada. So technically, I missed Sunday. Technically, it's Monday right now. This has been the first time in 30. I don't know how many episodes we already put out. No, we put out a lot more than 13. So we've been doing this for a couple of months now. I haven't missed a drop. So even flying to Guyana and all of that, I've been consistent. However, you still getting a video this week, just not on the day that I'm supposed to do it. However, I have this out for you guys. So if you guys remember though, my first video I did called Pocket Jesus, you know, I talked about, keeping Jesus hidden and sort of like having, this sort of Jesus that you just have off to the side that people don't really know. You're not overtly a Christian. It doesn't influence a lot of your, conversations and stuff like that. And, sometimes we want to protect our jobs. We want to protect our image in front of people. We want to not seem, you know, we get labeled in the movies and in our culture in general here in Toronto, Canada, as people who are, generally, I don't know, judgmental or something like that. People really don't like Christian. I believe it's the spirit of the Antichrist in the world that's actively attacking the image of Christians in, pop culture series and shows. Pay attention. Pay attention to every movie you guys watch. We was here kicking it. We always come and just kick it after church, me and my family and whatnot, and we watch a couple of movies, and we always identify, they always have the goofy Christians or something like that in the movies and whatnot. But for whatever reason, we try to stray from politics when it comes to Christianity, and there's some historical context as to why Christians generally do this, right? And there's a separation of church and state and those type of things. However, if you looked at Pocket Jesus, what I argued in that video is even your political views. Now, this is controversial. Maybe some Christians are like, nah, you know what? You don't need to talk about politics, that type of thing. However, what I'm gonna say is, for me personally, I think how I phrased it is, I said your worldview, right? The way you view how the world came into being, and like what is really going on at the background of everything that you see in the universe currently, is going to inform your philosophy, the way you think about things, and then how you think about things should affect your policies, the sort of like uh stances that you're taking on things, the things that you put in place. Like, I have policies on my job site. Whenever you're signing up for a company, signing up for some kind of like agreement, there's policies, there's terms and agreements of using that service or whatever the case is. And so your policies is usually influenced by your philosophy. Your philosophy is usually in line or in alignment with your world view. So I don't think as Christians we can shy away from politics. And so today I am going to talk about politics, and I planned this kind of in advance. I have tons of topics that I want to discuss at all times, but I did not necessarily plan to do it today. It just kept coming up over and over. I had conversations with people over and over, and I just figured, you know what? I think that's what I'm going to do this weekend. Turns out that we got an election here. I heard from my Trinidadian people, I heard y'all have an election in Trinidad. And there's some things going on in my country of birth, where I just came back from, that also is kind of crazy. It's, you could call it political as well. And we might get to dive into that situation and talk about it just a little bit from my vague understanding of the situation. At least I don't know, maybe not that specific situation. I might use that situation as a balance to talk about some things that we can extract, some things that we could learn, some things that I think we can implement in our thinking when it comes to these types of situations, right? Uh, in Guyana, some of you guys haven't heard. Maybe you have. If you're Guyanese, you most likely heard that there's a little girl who was, I think, believe she's an 11-year-old, and I believe she was. It seemed like, something nefarious happened to her in a hotel. It seems like some kind of witchcraft, demonic sacrifice might have taken place with this child. I mean, this is all allegedly, anyways, currently. But, you know, what I wanted to talk to you guys about specifically is my observation of a major problem within the political sphere right now. And many of you are familiar with the immigration crises. It seems like, some major countries in the world, some of the more desirable countries in the world, they had these things called visas. Most places you don't need a visa to travel to, because most people do not want to go there and stay there anyways. And there's some places that are really coveted, you know what I mean? And so the West is a place like this where people really, really want to go there. And so the West, especially, and various other countries around the world as well, they have implemented a system to regulate who comes into their country, and everybody knows this. You got to get a visa to travel to certain countries, right? Then if you want to actually go there and live there, there's a whole process that you need to go through in order to become a legal resident of that specific place, that specific coveted place. Now, talk about this great nation of Canada. Although I'm a proud Guyanese and I love my heritage and my people and all that type of stuff, I'm also like, I've spent some critical years of my life here in Canada, and I'm a Canadian, you know what I'm saying, as well. I got dual citizenship, but I'm a Canadian as well. And I also have love for Canada and ratings for Canada. People from my church will know that I represent the Canadian boot, you know what I'm saying, in my in a social event that we have where we represent various countries. Usually I drop the poutines and that, and I bust it out, and I have that already, you know what I mean? Proud Canadian boot member. And I just seen a void that I wanted to fill, because I figured we had to honor the country that we live in anyways, you know what I'm saying? And although we're from various backgrounds, you know what I mean, not only in our church but in all over, the cities of this great nation, we are, Canadians. We might be Jamaican Canadians, we might be Trinidadian Canadians, we might be blah 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 blah, whatever, right? Ultimately, this discussion over immigration has like many different facets that we could talk about. The way it's looked at on the two binaries is, one is like, yo, you're racist, and you're like, if you don't want people to just sort of like the border to be open, this is not your policies. You don't want immigrants to come in. You want to regulate immigration to a certain degree. Of course, there's nuances to all of this stuff. But then you got people on the other side that's like, nah, close the borders. You know what I'm saying? Let's get this thing under control. Let's regulate this totally. And like, uh, that's the way to go about it. And they're thinking that, and often this is seen as there's the left and the right, you know what I mean, or liberals and conservatives. So conservatives are generally the type of people that are saying, hey man, let's limit these type of situations. Let's limit the amount of people flowing through our borders. Let's make sure we're practicing proper vetting. Let's make sure that we put things in place to make sure that people don't get encouraged to just sort of cross into our borders willy nilly, and we just have like proper structures and systems. Not that we don't have these systems. We actually do have these systems, but whether they're followed or implemented in an effective way and stuff like that through different governments that are in place with different ideologies, this is actually something that's going to affect, what we see practically happening in Canada, in the US and in Canada. You've seen a lot of, they had like, millions of people flooding across the borders. And you've got situations in which, you got people coming into a country that maybe don't even really rock with or like, or are like, people who represent the views of that nation that they're coming into. Rather, they're here with their own sort of ideology, their own sort of perspectives, their own culture, and they're trying to instead of sort of coming into these countries and then sort of aligning with the culture and like assimilating to the nation that they're coming into. Oftentimes you'll find that there are some people that are coming with totally different ideological perspectives and trying to not only not assimilate, but even trying to even criticizing and trying to like destroy the culture or trying to change the culture that they're coming into. And it's a huge debate whether they're right for doing that or not. It's kind of like, it's kind of there's a lot of nuances to these topics, but specifically what I wanted to talk about is something that I personally observed, right? Which is population replacement. This is something that really needs to be understood when it comes to the immigration crisis, right? So, somebody's gonna say, "Well, Dale, you're not talking. You talk about politics." Yeah, I am, but I'm hoping that this sort of comes together as well for us as not only Christians and for people to understand. I mean, even if there's not a Christian perspective on this right now, at least, any type of knowledge is good. And so maybe, hearing me out on this might help somebody and help someone to think about it or help them to think about reasons as to why I might be wrong and engage and, argue or just debate by themselves or whatever. So help you to get your gears sort of turning on these things, right? And so what we got here is population replacement. What is population replacement? Well, for every two people, because for in order for you to make a new human being, you need at least two people. So for every family, you need to be reproducing at a rate of 2.1, in order to sustain the current population in Canada, right? About 2 point something, or I think it's 2.1, I believe, right? And so the point one, of course, at two, you'd be replacing your cells. You're not really doing much there. You're just replacing your cells, right? And the point one would factor in for a lot of people that might not make it to ripe old age or ripe age of being able to reproduce for themselves as well, just to sustain the current population, right? So you need population replacement. Now, the current rate of birth is significantly under that. It's the birth rate currently is 1.3 three. And so you've got, sort of what's happening in a society where you're not creating enough people to at least replace yourself. The first thing is you're dying. You're you're dying. You're killing off your own population. It's you know, I'm not going to use the G word here, but you're not doing yourself a service with regard to sustaining your own people, your own population, and farthering the growth and the development of your own country. And so it's super important for us to sort of have a proper population replacement rate, birth rate. It's super important for us to encourage families and situations, and you know what I mean, and help to sort of, I don't know, uh, sort of like water, or sort of saturate an environment that's conducive to creating life, right? Now, we talk a little bit more about that just now, right? Because here's what I'm gonna say: you don't want to just create babies. That's not the point. Because you also want to make sure that you have healthy populations. So you want to create babies in situations where human flourishing is best possible. So if you look at statistics, for instance, right, you'll find out that, a very high number of people that end up either incarcerated or in criminal and violent activity, or succumbing to drug addictions, and or prostitution, and all kinds of, like, just really horrible situations that you don't want to end up in. These are the stories in our life, or the stories in our society, that's really tragic. So a lot of people that end up succumbing to a lot of these tragic situations are people that are not necessarily, a high statistic of them are people that are not, that do not know both of their biological parents. So you also need to encourage not only having children, but you also need to encourage creating stable environments in which raising children is going to be, also congruent with, human flourishing, right? And so we would argue that is the, I'm going to argue that is the traditional family. And so when you don't have proper population replacement, what's happening also is your society is becoming what I'm calling top heavy. Top heavy is meaning that you have a larger population that are growing old, that needs sustaining, because the older population, for the vast majority of them, for at least a period of time, they are not capable of doing much for themselves. Of course, they might have already poured into the system and whatnot, but we, in our society, a lot of us are in debt as nations, right? We do not have extra money to be pouring, and there's the idea of what fiat currency is versus currency that's backed on, like, something as like the gold standard, or these type of things. And the overprinting of money, and then that causing what we call inflation, which is just horrible for the economy, right? So if you got the economy, sort of, a younger generation that's not reproducing as fast as the older generation, you've got now kids or young adults that are responsible for taking care of all of the mess that's made by the previous generation, or made by this lack of, you know, we have to sort of carry a weight, n- that's, or our children's children are gonna have to carry a weight where there's a lot less of them to sort of share the burden. And so, you got all of these type of things happening where you got population replacement not being you got population replacement not being met. You've got sort of like inflation going on. You've got you know the economy that needs to flourish as well. So, of course, you need more people in a society that are going to be pouring into the economy, whether that be like, you got housing industries and things like that. I'm a contractor. So, things need to get built and whatnot. And you need people to buy these houses. You need people to like pour into these economies. You need people to like, help to sustain the economy as it is. If you want to continue to develop and roads to be built and repaired and hospitals and schools or whatever education systems and stuff like that, you know, for the development of any community or any country or any nation, you're gonna need, you know, you're going to need more people pouring into that. And so we've got the crisis of us not being able to adequately meet the population replacement rate. And so this is where the immigration stuff comes in. And now it makes sense to sort of open up your borders. And there are some heavy hitters that are interested in, sort of opening the borders. And it's a good thing for our economy and things like that when you have more people coming in that are going to be pouring into the system and these type of things. Now, of course, there's a huge issue as well because when you have to open up your borders and you have to be a lot less discriminant, meaning you're not vetting people as much anymore because you can't discriminate as well as you could if you didn't need more people in your country. You're now going to create a situation in which you might not be importing the best and the brightest. You might not be importing the most moral or ethical. You might not be importing people that align with your values, your views, and that are here to assimilate into your culture or love your culture or love your country or want to see your country thrive or something like that. You might be actually doing the opposite in some cases. You might be even going as far as importing your enemies. You know what I'm saying? Importing people that hate you as the West, that hate what you stand for, that hates your religion, that your country is built on, that hate, like, you know what I'm saying? Um, you know, the things that these societies, this values that these societies are built on. And so now you got a situation in which, aside from just the hatred, right? You might just be bringing in people that you're not performing proper criminal background checks on. You might be bringing in people that are escaping things from their past, from other countries and whatnot, and you might be bringing in people that are also not here to contribute to the economy necessarily, but are here to freeload or loaf or, just benefit, just suck the economy, And so now you got a situation in which, you know, there's the problem, the hole that you're sort of trying to fill. You're potentially digging another hole and trying to fill that hole, potentially digging an even deeper or bigger hole, trying to fill that hole. Now, this is why I think this is a great topic because I'm gonna argue that there is three things that are directly jiving with Christian values and views, and that our society here in the good old fashioned nation of Canada and across the Western civilization, and across the globe in general. I mean, there are places that, of course, a lot of these things maybe are banned or outright criminalized or things like that. And now I'm not arguing for any view necessarily. I'm just mentioning the three I might focus on one specifically and, see where we go. But number one, number one of the number, these, this not in any order, by the way. Maybe abortion. Hmm. He did not just use the A word. I know you guys, these, nobody wants to touch these topics with a 10-foot pole. You know what I mean? This is worse. Those words, that's worse than, I don't want to say the word, than, video 19. You know what I'm talking about? You know what I'm saying? The whole pandemic. I use the word pandemic. I'm just trying not to hit some of these buzzwords that might get me in trouble or something like that, right? So I'm trying to be tactful. So, you know, uh, nobody wants to touch this topic of abortion, really. Not many people, anyways. But you can make the correlation here, right? We're talking population replacement, and we're saying, hey, we're digging a bigger hole or digging a hole to fill a hole. And so, what is the issue? How come our population replacement is suffering? And I would argue that abortion is a major one of these. Now, I don't know where everybody stands. Personally, as a Christian, I'm totally against abortion. I believe that life happens at the point of conception. And I believe that a lot of the arguments that are levied against it, that are used against it, actually do not work. You know what I'm saying? Oftentimes you'll have people levying situations of what they call grape, you know what I mean? And try to levy that as a way of saying, hey man, let's just open this thing up. And usually they're not really arguing genuinely for cases of grape necessarily. They're usually arguing for they're usually using that as a balance to say, hey, let's just allow this for anyone for any reason, for just convenience factors or whatever the case is. Either way, I'm not here to talk about abortion necessarily. I'm just saying that the abortion sort of acceptance, the ideology of it, just accepting abortions and, calling this women's rights and just allowing this to happen in our nation. Not only is there something that's immoral about it, but it's definitely contributing to our population replacement. And let me just say before I move on from that one, that, you know, often, you know, people see the abortion issue as like a women's rights thing. And what I'm going to say is that you definitely have the right to do certain things, really whatever you want to do. Ultimately, you get to choose what you're going to do. Even before abortions and stuff like that, they had ways, women had ways of, trying to curb this from happening. But ultimately, a society is going to best benefit from people who have discipline, who have control. Because what we do is we think that we open up the gate and make it safer for people to engage in the act that causes this situation to happen, where, there's a lot of casual sex and this type of thing, and then it causes a situation where a woman might have an unwanted pregnancy. And it's not always the case, but, you know, if we had a society that was encouraged to sort of learn how to curb their appetites and their intuitions, and ultimately subjugate their passions and their desires, and then live that out in the appropriate context of a safe confine of a marriage, where, you know they can safely bring a human life into the world, where, you know they're stable enough to bring a human life into the world. And that's sort of like, well, the ultimate way to curb this unwanted pregnancy situation, not by encouraging people to sort of indulge and try to curb it through other methods that ultimately end up failing them. And then ultimately they end up, because by the time you choose to do the act that can result in, as a consequence of that act, it can result in you end up having a pregnancy, right? Now this is where we get into the topic of, okay, when does it become a life, and like, is it murder, is it like, you know what I'm saying, like, and it's a whole messy thing, right? And there's a whole discussion that's going on here. And I'm gonna just say that, like, usually in the real world, the consequences of your actions are actually a really great way of learning how to curb, or how to deal with, or how to manage something that is so powerful. You know what I'm saying? And, taking away, trying to take away that consequence or minimize that consequence, and encouraging people to sort of like exercise that power and not be able to feel the consequence. I'm not sure that that's a great way of handling the situation. What I'm trying to say is this, right? I'm trying to say, if you allow people to sort of like, you know, face the reality of the decisions they make, ultimately, I believe that that is going to work as the best way of curving people from engaging in those in like casual sex, to the point where, again, unwanted pregnancies are going to happen and those type of things, right? And so what we need to learn as a society is not how to, you know give in to our temptations, and then try to work out these quick fix in between to try to, like, because it doesn't work. People, these are human lives. Even the women that have these procedures done and things like that, they're a lot of times they're never the same. A lot of times it can cause complications. A lot of times it can cause, future complications for their like future, like, actual wanted pregnancies and things like that. And so a lot of times these women carry deep guilt, because a lot of them do feel like they, unless you've grown totally callous or something like that, do feel like, they have murdered, or, man, I just used the word anyways, they have effectively ended a pregnancy, you know what I'm saying, or ended or terminated life. I don't know what's the words, what's the safe words to use here. I'm lost, but in any case, you guys get what I'm saying, right? And so that's the first thing. Abortions is a major issue. It's a major issue where politically we have dropped the ball when it comes to population replacement, and we have allowed for the problem to be, it's one of the ways that we've created the situation that we're in. And it's one of the major reasons that we are struggling now to find ways to rectify it, and we're not sure that we're doing all that great a job, or at least it doesn't seem like it, right? If you're looking at the economy, if you're looking at society, if you're looking at like rates of depression, if you're looking at rates of, like, suicide, people ending themselves, and if you're looking at all these cases of anxiety and all this type of stuff on the rise and things like that around you, and if you're just looking at the world in general and you're like, yo, what's going on? I believe today or yesterday, actually, in Vancouver, we had a situation. We were waiting to see what that case is as well, but you had someone ran into a crowd of people. I believe it's at a festival or something like that, and killed a bunch of people. And so you got about, I believe there's like 9 people dead in that situation, at least, that I saw earlier this morning, or earlier Sunday morning, as I was reading that news, right? And so you got things just happening all around you where you're just like, yo, what is going on here? And it's the potential that our patches that we're trying to create are actually backfiring on us, right? So you got abortion is one of the ways. I would even venture to argue the number one way in which we're dropping the ball, right? Now, the second thing is the LGBTQI, I don't know, plus whatever, two spirit, I don't know, ideology that has been encouraged in society. Now, here again, I'm not here to argue whether it's right or wrong. I'm on a biblical perspective. I take the view that homosexuality is not homosexuality necessarily, but the act of homosexuality is a sin, of course. Indulging in thoughts and allowing micro thoughts into your brain over and over again, like, conditioning your mind, and like, various other things, trauma and all this type of stuff plays into these conversations. But, you know, let's not even go there. Let's just say, hey, man, there's people who have these attractions, but, the act to act on it is a sin. And let me just stop there to say we all sort of have struggles. I believe every heterosexual male is gonna struggle with being totally monogamous, because they would want to sleep with as many beautiful women as they could find, and many other areas in our life, like we struggle with things that are not necessarily, again, congruent with human flourishing and those type of things. And so here we have another ideology that ultimately, again, sort of affects, the rate, the population replacement rate, right? This ideology being not only pushed and whatnot, and now we have, like, children and things like that who are getting, who are having these hormone blockers that they're taking and getting gender transition surgery. Not only children, but, like, even people who are considered a little older, or because I mean, in our society, you know, people conveniently are children in certain narratives, and then they're not in certain narrative. Technically, when you're 18, even like 16, 17, some people might say, hey, you're grown up, you can make your own decisions. Like, you're you're old enough, at least, with, being able to consent and various other things, uh, sign for yourself. And, they might say you're an adult. And then in some cases, we would say, nah, 18-year-old person is still a developing mind. They're still a child, like, you know what I mean? And these type of things, right? And so you got abortion, you got LGBT. Obviously, you know, there's only a certain type of relationship that's congruent with reproducing life. And of course, you got two men, that's not gonna happen. You got two women, it's not gonna happen again, right? And so, just keep it kicking, anyways. And I mean, there's other things we can say. We could talk about, our foods and certain things that are going into the foods and those type of things that are ultimately also making people not as virile as they would have been. You know what I mean? And so, you got sperm counts for men going down and those type of things. But the third thing that I wanted to talk about, and the thing that I probably want to discuss the most, is the attack on a trad family, traditional families, right? And really, I'm going to talk about the education system and those type of things as well that help to contribute to these. So let me take a sip of water. We'll get right back into it. I don't know. Hoping this is like beneficial for somebody trying to think about these issues as well. And either way, I'm just I'm just a talkative dude in general. You know what I'm saying? So it's better. It's a good outlet for me to sort of like make these videos and put it out there, get it sort of out of my brain as well. Um, so you've got the attack on the traditional family. What does Dilly mean by the traditional family unit? Obviously, I'm talking about, the only family that is congruent with reproducing life is the relationship between a man and a woman, and the sanctity, or the sort of the union of a marriage that creates a stable home and environment for raising youths that become a larger part of society in general. And we've essentially have an attack on the traditional family over the years. I would say that a lot of this stuff is satanic ultimately, right? It comes, and when we talk about Satan, this is going to be weighed out a lot better. You're going to understand who Satan is and how he operates in the kingdom on earth. He's sort of like behind kings and rulers, and you'll see this all through the scripture. This is actually how we know who Satan is, because you see him behind and in through people, like behind kings and these type of things, right? And so what we've got is sort of a satanic attack on the family, right? And there's many avenues we can go down with this, but specifically, I am of the opinion that one of the ways that one of the methods that has been used is the sort of education system, right? And I'm not saying education is bad, or there's not, I'm for education. I'm for people going and learning and developing their minds and stuff like that. I do think there's a lot of kinks and things that need to be worked out. Without going too deep into it, it's the whole idea of judging a fish by its ability to climb a tree, right? We're all made as individuals. We all have different giftings and talents and things that make us unique, and so you try to put a bunch of boys in a class to sit with along with a bunch of girls in the class, and just like focus and read and like sit in one place and stuff like that. It's going to be very different, because you got the boys are more like energetic and they want to run around, they want to play, they want to so they're going to excel in certain things, and then the girls are going to excel in certain things in general. You know what I mean? And so, and then aside from the binaries between the two sexes, you've got like individuals who, some guys have more energy and more, like they're not able to sit still, and we think something's wrong with that kid. We need to like sedate them or drug them or something like that. Nothing's wrong with that kid, bro. He's built different. He might be an athlete. He might be built for certain things, right? And so, there's a huge issue there. But specifically, we've got sort of like a whole university system that, for some people, climbing that ladder and coming out of their field of expertise or studies really can propel them into their future. But for the vast majority of people going in, funneling into the college and university system, ultimately coming out with a lot of times a lot of degrees that are totally useless. A lot of times they don't end up using the thing that they graduated for. They don't end up working in the same field. A lot of times, even if they end up working in the same field, they end up starting from the bottom of a company because they need to have experience. And a lot of times they're theoretic, the theory that they learned or the things that they learned, even if it's specific to their field, is not really actually useful in the field. And so now they need to learn, let's say a specific company operates a certain way, they have a certain way that they get their tasks done. They need to learn how to manage and how to execute these tasks from the bottom up. And so you got a lot of people graduating and still not being able to get a proper paying wage job and these type of things. And specifically, you got women who have a biological clock, right? So, wow, we're 44 minutes into this video. That's crazy. I thought I was going to get through this quick, but I guess not. So you got women who have a biological clock, and they are about 35 or so. A lot of the risks for having children with certain deficiencies and things like that are greatly increased, right? And so you you kind of push people into a system where they are they need to graduate from college or university. If they're going into anything worth studying, they're getting out of there by their, like, mid to late 20s. And if they spend any time at all taking breaks or whatever, or in between, they're coming out a lot of times more and more. Now, that's not everybody, not to say that everybody's following this system, obviously, but I'm saying more and more. You got people waiting now. A lot of In our society here, a lot of people are getting married, are sort of pushed to get married in their later 20s, early 30s, and those type of things. And there's a system that's a little more ideal for us here, where not only when you graduate, it's not, you don't go straight into marriage. A lot of times people would want to, like, sort of start up their career a little bit, especially if you studied for some sort of field or industry for a couple of years, at least 3 4 years. You've been studying to become a nurse or whatever. You know what I'm saying? When you get out, you want to work in your field. You know what I'm saying? And also you want to save money. You want to have enough money to put a down payment on a house, maybe. You know what I'm saying? Weddings are super expensive. You don't have to. You don't have to spend the money, but a lot of people do want to. And so a lot of people are saving up money for their wedding. They're saving up money for their down payment for their house. They want to make sure when they get married, they can move up out of mama and papa's house and do their own thing. And so, if you get out late 20, you're coming up to, like, you know, again, like maybe early 30s, where a lot of times, if you're meeting someone, or if you have someone at that point, a lot of times you want to get married. They want to have a couple of years grace period before they, or a year or two sometimes, before they have their first child. And then you want to have a little period in between having children before you have another child. And so this is one of the ways that the trad family has been disincentivized in our society. And I think that we would do better to encourage trad families. A lot of people are now picking up on this. And so you got, like, huge communities like the Jewish community that, they have this thing sort of worked out, where they're having babies at higher rates than anyone else. It's a serious issue, by the way, right? Like, if your population replacement is half what it should be, that means your your next generation is gonna die out at half. You're gonna half your whole population. Practically, this is how it can work out, is that you can potentially half your population in one generation. You know what I mean? Good news too is that you could probably fix it in another generation or two by just encouraging traditional families again, by incentivizing, having, not only having, incentivizing people having children, but also in incentivizing the unit, the family structure, that it's best conducive to raising those children, what I mean, in a way where they could be productive members of society. And, and really, so that's kind of it. Um, if you were to, if we were to just sort of bite the bullet, right? Let's say, and this is a left issue or a liberal issue for the most part, right? And for a lot of the liberal situation. And not to say that conservatives are not don't fall on any side of the fence on any of these issues, but for a lot of liberal ideology, the if they were to just bite this bullet and say, "Hey, man, we might have made a mistake, right? Like what's happening in our society. Like if we had just encouraged traditional family, if we had discouraged abortions in our nation or make it a little more difficult to access, or you know what I mean, sort of like I don't know, abolish it altogether. You know what I mean? And if people want to talk about, cases of rape, and people want to talk about life of a mother, without saying too much, I'll just say that, hey, man, this is not life of a mother is a weird topic because you're not trying to off anybody. You're trying to save both. And like in a case where there's a complication, you do what's best for the viability of whoever's gonna be able to survive easier. That's just common sense, right? That's just, you know, whatever. But you know, if you incentivize abortions, you were to sort of drift away from the LGBT ideology, what I mean, and pushing that agenda and, teaching this or whatever, or like encouraging that behavior in our society. And, you were to also encourage or incentivize the traditional family, you know what I mean? Incentivize people of get to get incentivize people to get married at a younger age and start families earlier. uh, Let me just say that when I say that, sometimes people are like, yeah, but like, like, because back in my days when we were growing up, indeed people were a lot more mature at a younger age, in the sense of like women were, like, I know, like back in the days, like 5-year olds that be cooking. Now I know that sounds ridiculous. My dad at the age of 10 was a fisherman and helping to mind his family. You know what I'm saying? So he dropped out of school. He started going on fishing boats with my grandfather and fishing and like helping to support the family. And so you could hardly imagine a 10-year-old being able to do something like that. You could hardly imagine giving your 5-year-old a sharp knife to like clean fish or something like that, or to pluck chicken, or giving her hot water. You know what I'm saying? But women were really about that business from those times. You know what I mean? 12-year-olds and 13-year-olds, they were really like, training and sort of like, and of course, and our society is not the same, and our cultural context is not the same, and like, there's a lot of things that need to be implemented before we can get to that. But I'm saying, hey, here's our issue, here's some things that are contributing to the issue, and then we could work to fixing it. I'm not saying you could fix that in a generation. I'm not saying you could fix it technically, practically it seems like you can, but I do think, like, when you go into the real world, there's going to be measures that are going to be taken to build up the future generation in a way where this is viable for them. Getting married younger is viable for them. Now, of course, there are other incentives. Like, right now, my country of birth, where Guyana, where I'm from, there I heard that they're giving out money for families. You know what I mean? Like, I know there's countries that every time someone gets married, they get, there's even been, I've heard of one place where they even like give you a home or something like that when you get married. I heard that there's like places where they give you money when you get married. There's places where they give you money to have children, and they're taking money and they're pouring it into a sustainable system, something that is gonna produce a return ultimately in their nations. And so there's a lot of ways that you can incentivize, again, the traditional family unit and things like that. So that's really it. I did say that I was gonna touch on this situation going on in Guyana with this young girl. I'm scared to say her name because I feel like I might have it wrong. I believe it's Ariana. You know what I mean? But you know, this situation, there's the idea that it's a satanic ritual that took place that took the life of this young girl. The idea is there's rich and powerful people who are not accountable to the law and justice. And so, we got people sort of taking on this situation and sort of, sort of trying to get justice for this young girl. It's a tragic situation in general, and there is something about social justice warriors that's, there's something about all of this stuff. Wokeism bring as a in its earlier phases was something that was intended to ultimately bring light to injustices. And so in that sense, I would say we should all be okay with wokeism. Of course, it's taken a dark turn and it's gone down some off the deep end of some cliffs that none of us should rock with. Feminism, same thing, started out as trying to bridge some gaps for women, giving them the right to, have their voices heard in, the political sphere and things like that through voting and various other things, you know what I mean? Which we would all rock with again. But then, of course, there's some deep ends that feminism has gone down that we, none of us should rock with. And the same thing with the social justice warriors, right? There is something virtuous about people trying to hold people accountable for certain actions, right? And there's sort of two things that I want to say about that situation. The first is that, you know, when it comes to the whole idea of Satanism, for instance, right? And if this really is a situation where there was a satanic ritual performed. And I do believe that this is happening to a degree, but my encouragement with people is to find God, bro. Find God because, like you're not fighting Satanism by going and, torching buildings. You're not fighting Satanism by going and doing certain things. That's a spiritual plane, it's a spiritual battlefield, you know what I'm saying? And so you want to make sure that you're fighting in the spirit realm, that you recognize that there is evil in this world, that there is an antagonist, there is the devil who's out here looking for the hearts and the minds of men, and he doesn't care. Look, he doesn't have favorites, right? It's not like, oh, like Satan is cool with black people and Satan's cool with white people, or he doesn't care. He doesn't care about black life, white lives, brown lives, nothing like that. He only wants souls, you know what I'm saying? And he hates all of us equally, and he's out to destroy us. I won't lie to you guys, I don't want to say nothing but to scare nobody. But like as I was talking about Satan earlier in this room, something sort of happened, you know what I'm saying? And I felt a shift and I know what was going on, right? And we ain't scared, right? We ain't scared. I'm just saying that, you fight demons and demonic things with spirit in the spirit realm. And so I would say if you recognize this situation and you see that there is people who are actually believing in these things, I want to say that they're real, you know? You're talking to somebody who has, like been involved in, attempting to do exorcisms and things like that. You're talking to someone who has been around, the church environment for long enough to have seen and witnessed pretty crazy things. You're talking to someone who has had divine experiences as well with, God and like spiritual beings and things like that. And so I'm here to attest to the fact that this stuff is real. That situation is a testament to the fact that this is real. And I want you guys to just think about the implications of that. You know what I'm saying? Think about who this antagonist is, why people are sacrificing, are attempting to sacrifice. I'm not saying this situation is, I don't know, right? I don't know. It's too early to speak on it. I haven't seen enough evidence myself. I haven't looked into it enough myself. If you guys have information and you want to share that, that's great. I'm definitely willing to look. And, if I do come to a conclusive thing later, maybe I'll say that. But I'm not saying that's what it was. I'm saying that these things do exist. And if that's the situation, or if that's what you believe happened there, then use that as a bounce to then find God. You know what I mean? Look for who God is, look for Jesus, look for, like, you know what I mean, start going to church, start, getting into a lifestyle of worship, start bunning out some of the things that you have in your life and whatnot, right? That's the first thing, you know what I mean? Against the satanic aspect. So that's how this social justice thing should be playing out right now. Cause you playing into the devil hand and attacking each other and killing other people and like doing all kinds of crazy stuff, that's not gonna help. That's actually gonna, that's more fuel into the hate fire. That's more fuel into the like whole that system. You know what I'm saying? And you even taking out some specific Satanists. There's still the demons that are uh like requiring these sacrifice. There's very people that are gonna fill that void ultimately still. So you want to be fighting in a way where you're effective. You want to be fighting in the spiritual realm. You want to be taking territory from Satan and adding, you know, to the kingdom of God. You know what I'm saying? That's the first thing. The second thing is, when it comes to justice, right? Unfortunately, bro, like, you know, we cannot attempt to take justice into our own hand. It's good for us to hold people accountable. I think there's some, like, if I understand the situation correctly, there was people that sort of held the line and didn't allow the body to come out of the hotel, and ultimately, stop them from being able to get away with this thing. I think that's really cool. That's honorable if that's what exactly what happened. I think, holding that line, I think that's amazing. However, until there needs to be a due process for these things, because once you take up, and this is the case with, I don't know if anyone's heard about the Salem witch trials and stuff like that. The accusations around that is people were just accusing people of being a witch and something like that and having them burnt at the stake. If you've heard about the issues in Pakistan with like Christians being accused of blasphemy against the prophet and things like that, and being sort of lynched by the mob. You look up Asma Bibi, I believe her name is. I believe she's in Canada now. Actually, I don't know. Maybe I just said too much, but like, you look at that situation, and like the whole nation wanted her dead for something that she was never proven to have done. And they couldn't even exercise a due process for her because her lawyers were getting killed by people that are in the country. I'm just saying, hey man, like, because if you open up that door of not allowing actual justice process to take place, allowing evidence to be collected and gathered, allowing what I'm saying, for certain things to play out, you might end up lynching the wrong person, is what I'm saying. You might just end up like carrying out some sort of vigilante justice, and you might become a victim of the same thing that you're doing. Because if you open up the door for that to happen in our society where there's not a due process, then what's going to happen is it can happen to you, it can happen to your friends, it can happen to your family, it can happen to, what I'm saying, somebody that you know and love. And so we do want to uphold some sort of level. There's a lot of cases even in the States. You got the, you guys heard about the, what's this guy's name again? The if the glove don't fit, you must acquit guy. The O.J. Simpson trial, where there's a lot of social pressure around that. You got trials for, people who I forget what the guy's name is in the George Floyd case and whatnot. You got a lot of social pressure. Sometimes that can interfere with justice because here's a case where people, the evidence just doesn't get to weigh itself out, and there's so much social pressure on the government to convict someone, that and juries and things like that to convict, and there's cases where if the jury didn't, even the people on the juror thing, fear for their life and things like that, and they didn't feel safe rendering the actual judgment that they felt was correct. You know what I mean? And so that's the second thing I wanted to say about that, as well as that you want to make sure that you know there is some sort of like process that is upheld, some sort of standards that are upheld, so that way the system, unfortunately, any system is going to have people falling through the cracks sometimes. And if you believe in this whole idea of there being a god and there being this actual demon worship type things going on, then you also believe that no one actually falls through the cracks, meaning that you might think someone got away with something that they did that's nefarious, you know what I'm saying? But God is the ultimate judge. He is, you know what I'm saying, seeing everything. He knows everything. There's no place you can go to hide from him, you know what I'm saying? And there's no evidence that can be erased and things like that that he doesn't know about. And so on Judgment Day, you know what I mean, that day is gonna come for people who are, sort of violating, you know, not only the laws of God, but violating their human brothers and sisters, you know what I'm saying? And so be comforted in the fact that ultimately justice will be served and justice will be done, you know what I mean? And be scared as well that, you also might come under judgment. So make sure that, you sort of make sure your heart is right and those type of things. I'm gonna just cut it there because, maybe I could talk forever. You don't know. Anyways, if you guys made it through this video all the way to the end, shoot, you guys, ratings. God bless.